Pacific Time on C-SPAN, the political network of record.
On Tuesday, Michael Portillo, British Defense Secretary, spoke to the Commons about the further deployment of British troops to the Balkans. This program lasts 45 minutes.
Madam Speaker, British Armed Forces have served in former Yugoslavia in support of United Nations missions since 1992. Their task has been difficult and sometimes dangerous. 18 British soldiers have lost their lives and 41 others have been seriously injured in the course of duty. They have helped to save many thousands of lives. We are rightly proud of them, as they can be proud of themselves. Since the summer, conditions in Bosnia have changed completely. At the London conference in July, the international community declared itself ready to take military action against the Bosnian Serbs. Britain took the lead with France in creating a reaction force and was then involved in the NATO action that followed. Since then, the international community has worked long and hard to support the American-led peace effort. At last, a settlement has been achieved. The Peace Implementation Conference, organised last week by the British government, made substantial progress with planning the civilian aspects of the peace agreement. Carl Bildt was appointed to oversee its implementation, guided by a small steering board which includes the G8 nations and the Organisation Islamic Conference. We expect the peace agreement to be signed in Paris on the 14th of December. At that point, the military task will be transformed. Within a few days, NATO will take over full military responsibility from the United Nations and deploy forces to implement the agreement. Our mission is to oversee the separation of the warring factions and the return to barracks of their soldiers, and to provide the security necessary for Bosnia and Herzegovina to establish national institutions and to hold free elections. NATO's mission is rightly limited in scope. It is also limited in duration to 12 months. For the first time, we have a comprehensive peace agreement. Its implementation requires international forces which are capable of deterring any breakdown in the peace. Only a NATO-led force can fulfill that mission. It will be NATO's first ever land operation. The plan involves some 60,000 troops, of which over 13,000 will be from Britain. We will supply a brigade and a divisional headquarters to command one of the three military sectors. In addition, Britain has the leading role in commanding NATO's Rapid Reaction Corps, a British-led multinational NATO force. We will provide most of the field headquarters, controlling the whole operation, including its commanding officer, General Sir Michael Walker. Britain's contribution is formidable. It expresses our willingness to fulfill our obligations as a key member of NATO and our international role as a member of the Permanent Five of the Security Council of the United Nations. It also indicates in the clearest manner the strength of our commitment to the security of Europe. Such responsibilities carry a cost which we are prepared to bear. It is my duty to be sure that our forces are able to carry out their purpose and to protect themselves. Of course, they will use persuasion to implement the peace, and in the British Army, even the most junior ranks have experience of making highly sensitive judgments on the spot. But when they need to take robust action, they will be equipped and authorised to do so. We shall be sending Challenger tanks, AS-90 heavy artillery, and armed helicopters. Our force will include the full panoply of signallers, engineers, medical teams and logistic troops. They will have with them 7,500 vehicles and 7,000 tons of ammunition. To move those forces rapidly to Bosnia involves a complex operation by sea and air, including, for example, 250 RAF transport flights. Military planners and civil servants have worked long hours to prepare a plan to deliver our forces and their equipment safely and on time. We have done everything possible to minimize the risks to our people, and yet there will be dangers. It will be important to them to know through this House that they have the undivided support of the nation. Once more, Britain's armed forces are deploying far from home, not to conquer, not to make war, but in the service of peace, this time as part of a NATO-led force. The government knows that they will carry out their responsibilities with great distinction. I hope that the House will take this opportunity to express its support for the men and women of the Royal Navy, the Army, the Royal Air Force, and the reservists and the civilians who accompany them. We wish them all success in their mission, and when the task is done, a safe return to their families.
Dr. David Clark.
Madam Speaker, can I thank the Secretary of State for coming to the House and making this very important statement today. I think there will hardly be a member who hasn't got a constituent who will be out there in Bosnia serving peace, as the Secretary of State has reminded us. And certainly I'm more than delighted to be able to ensure and assure the Secretary of State that he has the full support of this House, and our hearts do go out to the men and women who are travelling to Bosnia to try and ensure that the peace sticks. Madam Speaker, we've heard the Secretary of State today announce what amounts to a new chapter in the very sorry saga of Bosnia, a chapter which the whole House, I'm sure, will hope will have a happy ending. Now, there have been some in the press in particular who've sought to denigrate the role of the UN and UNPROFOR, but happily I don't think any in this House. And I would like to say, as we look forward, how much we are indebted to those men and women who have served with such distinction in the past. As the Secretary of State has reminded us, some of those people have paid the ultimate price. And of course, at this moment, as we come up to Christmas, we'll be thinking of their families in particular. But I think we all know that they have saved thousands of lives, and certainly they can wear their medals with pride. Similarly, Madam Speaker, we wish our troops who will serve on the new mission every success, and we trust that every one of them will return home safely. Their mission, as the Secretary of State has reminded us, is so worthwhile. But of course, it is a mission that is not without great risks. The history, the complexity, and the viciousness of the whole situation is there for us all to see. Indeed, Madam Speaker, I believe some of us saw it on television, the terrible pictures that within days of villages being transferred back to the other side, there was just wanton arsonage and the burning of decent homes. That just serves to remind us of the viciousness of the situation and the difficulties thereon. However, the peace will be based on the will of the three parties, and one of the tasks of the new organisation will be to try and ensure that that peace does hold. And as the Secretary of State has reminded us, that our experiences in Northern Ireland will serve us well when we come to try and perform that particularly tricky situation where we're trying to perhaps broker peace and ensure peace is continuing between three differing factions. Madam Speaker, we welcome the strengthening of the rules of engagement. I think that is much to be desired, and we've argued all along that our troops in this sometimes impossible situations should not be disadvantaged. But can I ask the Secretary of State just 2 or 3 questions? Will he make it clear to the House that this NATO-led operation will be covered by a mandate from the United Nations? and that when the current UN mandate runs out at the end of January, there will be a renewal of that, because it is important that it's seen that the operation does have the blessing and is with the support of the United Nations. And would he also say a word or two about the heavy equipment which is to be transported to Bosnia? Clearly, if our troops are to protect themselves and to do the job, they do need their heavy equipment. The Challenger tanks he's mentioned, the howitzers, etc., etc. Now, as the Secretary of State knows, in the past we have been unable to provide equipment to our troops because we quite simply could not transport the equipment in time. I understand from a parliamentary question that we are to borrow 2 United States ships to transport some of the equipment. Will there be any further UK ships involved in that operation? I do think the House would expect that that equipment is in position at the same time as our troops get there. And can the Secretary of State also say a word about the delivery of aid to Bosnia? Presumably, the UNHCR will continue to operate. Our RAF Hercules have already taken in 26,000 tons of food into Sarajevo. Will those mercy flights still continue? And what advice is the Secretary of State giving to the organisations which will wish to continue to send relief overland? What protection is going to be offered to those convoys? What role will NATO play in this respect? Now, Madam Speaker, the whole House will be conscious. No, it was not part of the statement. I'm afraid I've got to ask the question because there will be aid. There will be British people wanting to send aid, especially at this time, and I think the whole House will want to know how we're going to coordinate separating the warring factions and at the same time delivering the aid. But, Madam Speaker, I think we all are conscious that we are sending our troops at a particularly special time, at a time when the rest of us will be looking to spend time with our families. We'll be asking our servicemen and women to leave theirs and to go and serve overseas. So as we wish the men and women Godspeed and pray that every one of them will return safely, I think it becomes us all to think of the families who will be left behind.
Mr. Portillo.
I'm most grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for the welcome that he's given to the statement and for the words that he's spoken today, recalling that we do all indeed have constituents who will be travelling out to Bosnia. I'd like to join the Honourable Gentleman in praising what has been done by the United Nations. UNPROFOR has done much to contain the conflict. They've saved a lot of life, and they can take credit for their part in paving the way towards the peace agreement that we now have. And may I join the Honourable Gentleman too in condemning the scorched earth attacks that we've been witnessing on our television screens. These have no part in the peace agreement which has been entered into by the warring factions. On his questions, there will be a United Nations Security Council resolution, and it is planned that that should be put into effect immediately after Paris and would therefore cover the NATO deployment. I can confirm the importance of the heavy weaponry. I don't want to imagine a situation in which we would need to use our tanks or heavy artillery, but I think it is important to face down possible confrontations from warring factions. It's important for the protection of our people, and ultimately, if any of our people needed to be withdrawn from an area, it would provide the best possible cover for them to be able to do that safely. We shall use the shipping to transport this equipment that is best suited to the task. The United States has a certain amount of specialised shipping which we're making use of, but we may well have to make use of other shipping assets, including ferries. We will charter ships as they are available to us. That will include a certain amount of United Kingdom shipping. But let me make it perfectly clear, we are not requisitioning ships. We are chartering ships on the open market, and it will be the ships that are available at the time. Their nationality in this respect is not the vital point. The point is that they should be available, and a lot of United Kingdom shipping is of course not available. It's actually working very hard on commercial shipping projects. As far as aid is concerned, of course there will continue to be aid. The UNHCR will continue its operations in Bosnia. The RAF is available in principle for mercy flights, but I think much of the aid now can be delivered by road, and that is more effective and more cost-effective. And the point of sending in such a large force is to separate the warring factions, create a zone of separation, create safety and security, so that convoys and indeed ordinary civilians can go about their business no longer in fear of their lives. And to create that situation of security is a vital task for the implementation force. Finally, may I say to the honourable gentleman that whilst I am grateful to him for what he said, what is more to the point is that the armed forces will be very grateful to have the support of the party opposite.
Mr. Michael Portillo.
Madam Speaker, I'm sure that the whole House and all those constituents who we represent will applaud the fact that 13,500 British troops, including some 750 territorials, all of whom are volunteers, will be sacrificing their Christmas at home in order to enable former Yugoslavs to enjoy, hopefully, theirs in peace for the first time for nearly 5 years. Could he confirm that all the implementation forces will have robust rules of engagement? And could he also say something about the new phrase, which I think he himself coined, mission creep, and say how far this mission, this NATO mission, has to creep in order to make it necessary for the NATO forces to be withdrawn before the 12 months is up?
I'm most grateful to my honourable friend. I should perhaps emphasise that a number of the forces going to Bosnia will be able to enjoy Christmas still in the United Kingdom. Given that the heavy equipment takes some time to move by sea, they will very often be flying out to join their equipment, and they will be flying out in the days between Christmas and New Year or in the New Year. Some, however, certainly are already there, and others will be there in time for Christmas. The figure that I anticipate for reservists is 460. It will require us to involve a larger number than that, given that we have to allow a margin for unfitness and so on. But those reservists will be very welcome. They are generally in specialised functions, and they will play an important part. The rules of engagement are NATO-wide. All NATO forces have agreed to the same rules of engagement, and they are robust, but I think they are also sensitive, and they've benefited, I think, from a particularly strong British input, given our experience of policing these situations in Northern Ireland. I don't think I coined the expression mission creep. I think it comes from across the Atlantic. But I'm very determined indeed that the NATO operation should be limited in its scope. We have no business to be inventing one task after another. The important thing is that we have a job to do. It is clearly defined. We will do it. We'll do it within 12 months, and then we'll come home.
Dominguez Campbell.
May I, on behalf of my honourable and right honourable friends, express our support for the operations which the Secretary of State has just described, and say that I too share his confidence that our forces will fulfil their responsibilities with distinction and with professionalism. In a careful use of language, the Secretary of State said that the mission was limited in duration to 12 months. May we take it that that is a target and not a deadline, and that if the peace agreement is on course for successful implementation, there will be no automatic withdrawal at the expiry of 12 months. And further, it appears from what the Secretary of State has told the House that there are a number of distinctions, important distinctions, between what is now proposed and the force which previously operated under the aegis of the United Nations. Am I correct that one of the most important distinctions is that the so-called dual key system will not operate, and that there will be no hindrance if commanders on the ground require it? There will be no hindrance to the full and effective use of air power.
I'm most grateful for what the honourable gentleman has said on behalf of his party. The mission that is defined here for the NATO implementation force is perfectly clear, and it is well achievable within the 12-month period. The separation of the forces, the establishment of zones of separation, the return of forces to their barracks, the holding of elections, all of that can well be done within the 12-month period and must be done. And I think there is no point in implying to anyone in Bosnia that they have longer in which to undertake these necessary elements of the Dayton Agreement to which they are signatories than the 12 months specified in my statement and also by the other countries who are signatories. There is indeed the distinction between the United Nations operation and the NATO operation, which the Honourable Gentleman speaks of. There is no dual key. There is a clear command and control structure. However, this mission can only be a success if the civilian aspects of the peace agreement are also implemented, by which I mean the development of the institutions of a free society of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And that was the focus of the conference in London on Friday and Saturday, to make sure that under Carl Bildt's guidance, those civil institutions come into existence. That will enable the NATO force to withdraw and leave behind it a satisfactory situation. But it is certainly not intended to inhibit the forces from exercising the rules of engagement, certainly up to and including the use of air power if that were necessary.
Sir Geoffrey Johnson, sir.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for telling the House so clearly that this is a NATO-led operation. By that, I assume he understands, as we all do in this House, the difference between this NATO-led operation and a UN-led operation is this is a peace enforcement programme to enforce an agreement. And the other one was, of course, peacemaking. Can he give, therefore, the assurance, which I think he pretty well gave to the honourable gentleman of the Liberal benches, that, in fact, there is total confidence in the ability of the NATO-led forces to operate as they think fit without undue interference from the UN. Now, it is not to say that I do not admire the work done by the UNPROFOR, working under the aegis of the United Nations, but it is imperative to understand that. And secondly, that should there be no peace agreement after a year has elapsed, whilst it's understandable there's no absolute deadline, we are all aware in this House of the pressures put on the American contribution to NATO by Congress, that if it's not complete in a year, they will go. In those circumstances, can he reassure the House that we have contingency plans well in mind?
I can certainly give a number of the assurances that my honourable friend seeks. This is, as he says, a NATO-led force. I'd just like to remind the House, of course, that we're envisaging contributions possibly from 14 non-NATO countries, and that we're particularly pleased to see Russia operating alongside this NATO force. But my honourable friend is quite right to say this means, as he put it, no undue interference from the United Nations. The political control of this operation is through the North Atlantic Council, which is the political council of NATO. And on the last point, this is not a matter for national decision-making when we enter and when we leave. Since this is a NATO operation, it's all in, all there, and all out together. Nobody is going to peel off halfway through this operation. We will act in concert, both in arriving and leaving.
Italian.
Burying the darkest misgivings as to whether this force will be able, in decent circumstances, to withdraw in my lifetime, could I ask a very specific question about the Scots Dragoon Guards, who presumably are supplying, quite rightly, the armour that's necessary? I'm told that their official complement is only 316. If they are to provide the kind of cover that this House knows is necessary, surely their complement should be extended very quickly if there to be the tank regiment involved.
The tank regiment involved is the Queen's Royal Hussars at Catterick. I had the pleasure to visit them yesterday. They are 2 squadrons of Challenger 1 tanks. That is, I think it's about 26 Challenger tanks that they'll be taking with them. And they expressed no reservations yesterday about the state of their equipment, supplies, spares or fuel, even though I pressed them on that. But of course, we intend to make sure that our troops are well supplied in the field.
Sir Patrick Cormack.
In echoing my right honourable friend's support for and admiration of our troops, and thanking him too for the part he's played in the more resolute leadership of recent months, could I ask him to make one thing quite plain? if the civilian population is threatened, will our forces, the NATO forces, be able to react as if they themselves had been threatened?
They will react because they are there to implement a peace agreement, and the peace agreement does not include the continuation of the slaughter of civilians, and therefore the NATO forces will deal even-handedly with violators from whichever side they come who seek to undermine the peace agreement into which they've entered.
Mr. Frank Cook.
Will the Secretary of State agree with me that the crucial date in all this is not someday in December 1995, but someday in December 1996? And that, as I understand it, the implementation force is required to be even-handed. But as we've seen in the past, even-handedness can be on one side only. And we've seen very many ceasefire agreements collapse by the dozen over the past 3.5 years. What provision is there to review it in 12 months' time, with the prospect of hanging on there just the extra mile? And would the Secretary of State, bearing in mind that the United Nations have been criticised by everybody, all its member states in fact, they've used the United Nations organisation as a whipping boy for failing in the past, which I think has been quite unjustified. The United Nations has come of age in the last 5 years due to this issue. Will he do his utmost to ensure that our associated nations are advised that the United Nations, in fact, will have the problem of perhaps picking up the pieces long after NATO is withdrawn in 12 months?
Well, I do want to echo again my agreement that I think the United Nations has come under unjustified criticism. It's done a job as well as it could, and some of its failings have been due to its member states rather than to its organisation. And when you come to an operation like this, which is a very robust military operation, it's not surprising that it is only an organisation like NATO, or rather I should say there is no organisation like NATO, and only NATO can do it, and that is not really very surprising. Well, there will be many crucial dates, I dare say, but I don't think it would be right, in responding to the honourable gentleman, in any way to open up the prospect of this operation going on more than 12 months. It's critical that NATO should know it's 12 months, it's critical that we should understand it in this House, and it's critical above all that the people of Bosnia and Herzegovina should understand that after a certain period, if there is to be peace in their country, it has to be generated from within. It cannot perpetually be imposed from outside.
Mr. Jenkins.
Could I ask my right honourable friend if he could give details of forces from Colchester in my constituency that are likely to be deployed as part of this force? And could I endorse not only his guarantee that 12 months is the absolute limit, which both politically in Bosnia and throughout the NATO countries is a very important limit, but also that if the agreement begins to come unstuck before the 12 months period is up, that we will not seek, in his own words, to try and impose a peace that the Bosnian and Serb peoples do not want.
In the list that I'm looking at here of forces, I don't see any reference to Colchester, but I don't exclude that there may be logistics and engineers and so on based at Colchester who will be part of it. As far as 24 Air Mobile is concerned, which I know is my honourable friend's particular concern, the bulk of 24 Air Mobile have returned to England, and those that have been left behind will be returning shortly. They will not be part of this operation. They are one of the few exceptions to the otherwise general rule that the forces that are there with the United Nations mission, British forces, will remain and be part of the NATO implementation force. I do want to just emphasise again that I think the 12-month limit is important, and I'm not getting into any speculation about what would happen if the mission failed. The mission is clear: separate the forces, return them to barracks, hold the elections. All of that is achievable.
Mr. Dennis-Kidder.
Doesn't the Secretary of State agree that one of the biggest problems that you're going to have to face amongst these different warring factions will be the movement of large areas of population from one area and one village and town to another in order for the implementation of this so-called peace treaty? Is he really asking us to believe here today that he's asking for support from all members of the House for a so-called 12-month operation, which is not clearly defined, that might extend a month or two, but we don't know how long? We know it's in some way connected to the American presidential election next year. It's probably connected as well to the election in Britain. If that's true, and we have that knowledge, the Serbs, the Croats and the Muslims know that as well. And therefore, won't it end not in 12 months, but the chances are, and it may as well be put on the record here, because a lot of people in this House know this and understand it, that this 12 months is going to be a lot longer than that, based upon everything that we've known that's taken place in the Balkans over the course of past, well, centuries, but certainly over the course of the past few years. And isn't it as well that in this place where you're supposed to speak the truth, why isn't it said from the dispatch box that these British soldiers are not just facing this Christmas, and we're all worried about them, but they could be facing next Christmas and a lot longer after that?
I don't say that because that is not the position. We have a NATO operation which has been defined as lasting 12 months. A number of us have committed ourselves to that position. For example, the German equivalent minister has made a commitment to his parliament of 12 months. He has authority from his parliament for 12 months. And it is true that Serbs and Croats take account of what goes on in this House, and that is why I don't think it does any service to this House, to this country, or to our troops for the honourable gentleman to start opening up doubts about that, and in particular to imply that I said it might extend a month or two. I said no such thing.
Mr. Bill Walker.
My right honourable friend will be aware that it's not the first time in history that British troops have been involved in peacekeeping operations of this kind. Can he assure us that the supremacy required in the air to make sure that the troops on the ground carry out their task properly will be an ongoing matter that will exist throughout the whole period that our troops are there?
Yes, domination from the air is essential. The deny flight operation, as it's known, will continue, and the role of the air forces and indeed of the sea aviators will continue to be extremely important. And although we're talking today mainly about land forces being committed to Bosnia, we should never forget that there are already about 3,000 servicemen, mainly from the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force, who are serving outside Bosnia but connected to the Bosnian operation, many of them afloat, some of them at Italian bases.
Nobody's saying anything. John Hume Robertson.
Having helped to deliver aid to refugees from what were supposed to be United Nations safe areas, can I say that it's a tragedy that this action was not initiated before the fall of Srebrenica and Zepa and some of the other atrocities, but certainly better late than never. Will the Secretary of State accept that it's absolutely essential, not only for the people of Bosnia, but also for the credibility of NATO and of the United Nations and of the international community, that this operation, this peace, should succeed, even if that involves staying there into 1997 or beyond? And finally, Madam Speaker, can the Secretary of State say anything about what may have been done to minimise the risk of casualties from friendly fire from the Americans or any other members of the international force?
Good one.
There have been many tragedies along the way. I only came to my position in July, and from my perspective, I would say that it was only after the fall of Srebrenica and Zepa that it was possible to put together the international consensus, which actually coalesced at the Lancaster House Conference in July, to enable a more robust attitude to be taken against the humanitarian atrocities that we were witnessing. Certainly, I think the credibility of NATO is involved here. But as I said before, I mean, ultimately, it has to be the people of that area who love peace more than they love war for this peace to succeed. Ultimately, it is not, I think, possible for the international community to be able to give a guarantee that peace will last. We can go any distance to create the conditions in which peace can be given a chance, and I believe the international community is doing that on this occasion. As far as avoiding friendly fire is concerned, that is, of course, an important matter. One of the attributes of a NATO operation is that we have the full panoply of intelligence provided by the United States and by others at our disposal. And that, of course, means aerial photography, satellite photography, and the most sophisticated forms of intelligence, so that we should be able to manage the battlefield, if we're involved in a battlefield, and have a good understanding of where our own forces are, as well, of course, as where the enemy forces are, if we found ourselves in that position. But I'm still very much hoping that this is going to be an operation of persuasion and peace implementation, and not an operation of fire, friendly or otherwise.
To David Sandberg.
We must hope that this process works and that our troops are safe and free from danger. The troubled history of Yugoslavia must cause us to exercise some caution. Would my right honourable friend ignore the siren voices from the Liberal benches and one or two and the principal opposition party and make it absolutely clear that 1 year means 1 year as far as we're concerned?
At every level of the planning of this operation through NATO, it has been understood that this operation was limited to 12 months, and that is the understanding of every participating country.
Max Madden.
Wishing the entire force success and safety, can the Secretary of State say what arrangements are in place to facilitate the exchange of prisoners, both military and civilian? And can he also say what determination there is within the force to bring those who stand accused of war crimes to justice?
The Dayton Agreement does make provision for exchange of prisoners, both military and civilian, and the implementation force will play a role in supervising those exchanges. As far as the war criminals are concerned, NATO is drawing up presently guidance for its forces on this matter. I think that it is inconceivable that if wanted war criminals fell into the hands of the implementation force, that they would not, in those circumstances, hand them over to a competent authority for trial. One of the things we need to establish is what exactly is a competent authority in all the areas in which the implementation force will be operating. It's a difficult legal question with which NATO is wrestling at the moment, but with the intention that if they find themselves in possession of war criminals, that they will be brought to justice.
To Billingham.
Madam Speaker, will the Secretary of State join with me on the subject of aerial photography and pay tribute to the Canberra Reconnaissance Squadron at Mara, which day in, day out has been flying over former Yugoslavia on very long missions indeed. But would you agree with me that the security of Europe and NATO are synonymous? And surely these events vindicate the government's line that NATO must be the key pillar to Europe's security and Europe's peacekeeping.
Yeah. I very happily join my honourable friend in paying tribute to the aerial photography reconnaissance flights that have been carried out, as he says, day after day in difficult conditions and bringing vital data for our forces. I think on his second point, it is very remarkable that we've seen recently Russia's willingness to cooperate with NATO, French willingness to draw closer to NATO, and the fact that when we need to do a robust military operation in Europe, it has to be NATO that undertakes it. Only NATO is capable of that. And what is more, for as far ahead as one can see, it will continue to be only NATO that is capable of performing such a function.
Mr. Harry Cohen.
Okay. Will the Secretary of State give the House an absolute guarantee that the arms embargo won't be lifted while British troops are out there on this mission? And also that the defence exports part of his department won't be busy trying to make arms sales while another part of his department is looking after the security of the British troops out there?
The honourable gentleman, I think, raises the most important subject, which is the question of arms control. The Dayton Agreement foresees that one of the conditions for lasting peace is that there should be a better balance between the armaments possessed by the different warring factions. It is clearly much to be preferred that that balance should be achieved by the disarmament of the Croats and the Serbs to a level close to the level of the Bosnian Muslims. However, if we fail to make progress in disarming those factions, then the Dayton Agreement envisages the possibility of training and weapons being provided to the Bosnian Muslims. There will be a conference on arms control in Bonn shortly before Christmas. And I think it's extremely important that the international community should use all its resolve and all its muscle to ensure that we go the former route rather than the latter. Particularly with our troops on the ground, what we wish to see is a reduction of the arms in theatre, not an increase in their number.
Matthew Banks.
My right honourable friend might recall, before he became Secretary of State for Defence, that several years ago, on a number of occasions, not just one in this House, I expressed concern that British troops were being sent to Bosnia to police a United Nations, as it then was, ceasefire, and not to take part in guerrilla warfare. As each Parliament goes by, even the youngest amongst us recognise that there are fewer and fewer honourable and right honourable members in this House who have any experience of service life whatsoever, let alone active service. Given the fact that a safe area is only safe if it is militarily safe, given the fact that aid and matters raised by some honourable members earlier may well be laudable aims, would my right honourable friend not lose sight of the important fact that there is a long way ahead to attaining a proper peace? And will he assure the House today that servicemen on the ground will, through the rules of engagement, be empowered to adequately defend themselves if they themselves, as they may well do, come under attack in the days and months ahead?
Well, this situation is different in that we do now have a peace agreement. The three parties have signed up to something, and we are going there to implement a peace agreement that they have entered into. And the implication of that is that we shall use persuasion to make sure they meet their obligations. But if persuasion does not succeed, then we will use force. And certainly, if we come under attack ourselves, we will respond robustly. The rules of engagement, of course, cover self-defense. They always have done. But what the rules of engagement now cover is the ability to implement the peace agreement that these people have signed up to. I very much hope that persuasion will be enough, but we're sending the weaponry necessary to give that persuasion the best possible chance, and if the persuasion fails, to make sure that other methods will succeed.
Dr. Norman Godden.
Whilst I've not conducted any kind of survey among Scottish soldiers destined for Bosnia, I'm confident that our servicemen and servicewomen would much prefer that the heavy equipment that they'll need would be carried in ships flying the Red Duster rather than flags of convenience. And could I seek from the Secretary of State an assurance that he will do all he can to hire British ships to carry this equipment, even although our merchant fleet has shrunk to a ghost of what it was? Surely that equipment is better carried in our ships than ships hired on what he calls the open market. Maybe he ought to be giving less emphasis to the open market and showing much more confidence in the Red Duster.
I really don't think the Honourable Gentleman is onto a strong point here. We are not deploying in a war situation. We are not deploying in an emergency. We are not requisitioning shipping. We are moving equipment according to a carefully worked out plan, and we will take the shipping that is available on the days that we need to move it. I'm pleased to say that much of British shipping is busy. It has contracts. It is working. The owners of those ships don't want to be disturbed by demands from the British government. We will take the shipping that is available, and that will undoubtedly include some British shipping. But what our forces want, I believe, is their equipment delivered to the right place at the right time, and we will do that in the most effective manner possible.
Callum MacDonald.
The Secretary of State talked about the role of the NATO forces in implementing the success of the civilian aspects of the agreement. Would they acknowledge that includes the right of return of refugees, as well as the free and fair elections he mentioned? And is it not essential to the credibility of NATO that neither of these be thwarted by force over the next 12 months?
Yes, the right of return for refugees is a very important part of the Dayton Agreement. And naturally I've been concerned, as others will have been, at the stories, particularly about Sarajevo, implying that thousands and tens of thousands of people will feel it necessary to leave their homes as a result of the peace agreement. The point of the peace agreement is that people living anywhere in Bosnia and Herzegovina should be able to do so in security. The point about Sarajevo is that this city should be able to return to its famed previous position as being a multi-ethnic city at peace with itself. Those are the objectives of the implementation force, to make sure that in the next 12 months people feel that degree of security, and where they have left their homes, that they feel secure enough to return to them.
Harry Barnes.
Sometimes it's wise to take 12 months at a time. And whilst we are all aware of the problems that are faced with paramilitary forces and the need to control any action or any excess that's engaged in by those forces, we also need to realise the possibilities that exist as far as civil society is concerned, because there are many people in Bosnia who have always opposed the violence and intimidation and the action that's taken place. And the hope really is in that civic society being built up. And in those circumstances, troops are then going to be in safer situations and can begin to be withdrawn.
Well, of course, I try and keep my eyes well open to the realities and to try to see more than 12 months ahead. But I think the Honourable Gentleman is right to say that the House is concentrating today on an operation which has been designated by NATO and that has a life of 12 months. He is absolutely right, of course, in saying that the success of that mission and the success of peace depends upon the building of institutions within Bosnia and Herzegovina that attract the trust of the people and eventually make them desire peace more than they desire war.
Thank you.
To assist with peacekeeping.